Cool? Ready? Yeah. All right. Stretch. Okay, here we go. Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and I have a very, very special guest on here. Normally I would do my Q&A at this time, but I'm actually traveling, so I just kind of worked out where we have a very special guest, Kristine McAlister. She is an expert on turning tragedy into triumph. She founded her company Life with Passion after a full-term birth of her first daughter, Maeve. She's been featured in Inc., Business Insider, and Huffington Post, as well as Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast. These are some pretty legit places, far more legit than we are here, but she still wanted to come on because she's awesome. She helps high achievers all over the world to quit and stay out of their 9-to-5s by building businesses out of their passions. And this is like, a business connection, I guess, that we don't typically have here on Goulet Pens. Normally I'm the one talking business things, and I don't have a lot of business guests on here, but it's pretty cool because I linked up with her dad from the Atlanta Pen Show a couple of weeks ago, and her dad was like, my daughter's writing a book, she's a fountain pen fan, she used your Edison Nouveau Premier Seaglass to write the book, and she, I was just like, this is such a cool story. So I emailed Kristine, she linked up with us and was willing to come on and do an interview. So that's why she's here. Kristine, it's great to have you on here, and thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, for sure. So, Kristine, what's your background and what are you doing here? I guess is what we should get off with, right?
Right. I have a super varied background. I studied video production in undergrad and graduate school. I was planning to go into the film industry in DC or LA as a music video producer. I produced a documentary for PBS that won a bunch of awards when I was in grad school. What I wound up doing instead was becoming a professor at my alma mater. And then I became a career counselor. But all the while, as soon as I got into my first job, I started a side hustle as a digital marketer because I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just couldn't figure out how. I didn't have the plan when I was in undergrad and graduate school. I feel like we learn how to be really good employees in the school system. That's a generalization. But I didn't know how to become an entrepreneur. So I worked in the 9-to-5 world for a long time, several years, always side hustling. And I had some really cool freelance gigs in there. I've worked at the Olympics 3 times in broadcasting. But I built this digital marketing company. And then in 2015, I started this business, Life with Passion, which is my 4th business, to help people become entrepreneurs, right? To kind of be that stopgap that I didn't have.
Wow, your 4th business. Holy cow. You are a dynamo, I must say.
I think I'm older than you too, so
Well, it's even still. For anybody to say I'm on my 4th business is pretty respectable. So part of the reason that you're here right now is because you actually have this book called The Income Replacement Formula, 7 Simple Steps to Doing What You Love and Making 6 Figures from Anywhere, which sounds pretty compelling, I must say. And I've read a lot of business books myself, and you actually sent me, just so to make you all kind of jealous here, and to show you how awesome Kristine is. You got, what, 2 copies of this proof? Your book is yet to be released as of when we're actually recording this. Yeah. And it even says not for resale on the front of the book because it's a proof. She sent me one of the 2 proofs that she has so I could read it in time for this interview, and I got it yesterday. And I plowed through it last night. And I gotta say, it's actually quite good. I've read probably 120 business books at this point. But it's really, really good. And you start out, talking about your background, your story. You've done consulting for, especially, female entrepreneurs who are trying to live by their passion, which I am super, super into. I work with my wife, Rachel. We 2 of us kind of started this business together. The whole entrepreneurial thing definitely strikes core to my heart. So that's really cool to speak to kind of a kindred spirit in that way in you. But then you get very tactical at the end of the book, which was really compelling as well, because I think, there's an emotional component to this whole kind of taking that leap. But then there's also a very practical component, which is like, if I can't pay my bills, how am I going to live by my passion? So can you speak to me a little bit about, this process of what it was like to come up with the book? Because this is your first book, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes.
Tell me, what was that process like for you, actually sitting down and taking your vast business experience and putting it into a book?
Yeah, it was very interesting because when I started, I actually wrote a completely different book first.
Really?
And
what was that book about then? I'm curious.
So that book was about Maeve.
Okay.
That book was about, and we'll get into that, but that book was about turning tragedy into triumph.
Okay.
So that's so much of my broader message and my broader why is to help people go from surviving to thriving, right? And to make that choice and learn how to do that and see what's possible.
And you do talk about that in income replacement formula as well.
Yeah, because she's the reason that I started this business. My pivot from digital marketing was as a result of losing her. And so I felt that I knew I had a book. So I started writing this other book first. And then actually just in November, I was meeting with a friend of mine who's super successful. She's been doing this a long time. She's a published author. And she said, Kristine, who do you want to attract most in your business right now? And I was like, well, I want to help people quit and stay out of their 9 to 5. And she's like, you have to write that one first. And I went, oh. So I got with my assistant and I was like, let's pull everything together I've ever written about leaving your 9 to 5. And of course, Maeve's going to feature very heavily in it, but we're going to set aside this turning tragedy into triumph one until I'm speaking on big stages. I have a much broader audience, like that whole thing. Yeah. So that book's like 70% done. And in about 2 months, we pulled what we needed to pull. I picked a lane, right? Because I was trying to do both for the first year of this book. And I finally picked a lane. My assistant was very relieved because she'd been helping me edit, and she didn't tell me this. She's too nice, but she was kind of like, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Like, who are you talking to?
Right.
So we pulled everything together, and I added, of course, a bunch of stuff. And then I hired an editor to help me get it done. Like the act of paying her is what got me to get my butt in gear and finish the book, because otherwise you could go on forever with a mostly finished manuscript and, making time for other things in your business rather than the book.
Right. And that's one leap I haven't taken. I think it's interesting you said you had a book. Like you knew you had one in you. I'm curious, at what point would you know that? Like, have you always kind of thought about this, or did it come very organically?
It was super organic. So I'm a huge reader. From day one, I was an early reader. I loved listening to stories being read to as a kid. And then I read a lot growing up and in my life. I just love it. And I write a lot as well. And so the idea of a book was very kind of just out there, like, wow, that would be cool. But never at the forefront until a few years ago. I was in London. I have some good friends that I have known since we were all teenagers, and we've kept up for 20 plus years. And we're out at a pub. This is like after I worked at the London Olympic Games, and so I'm visiting my friends afterward, like kind of decompressing from this crazy month. And we're out at a pub, and my friend Ray said to me, "You've got a book in you. You've got a book in you." And I thought, yeah, I do. Now, Ray is very insightful. He's a vicar. So he's very pastoral, and so in my acknowledgments, like, I thank him because, he's the one who kind of called it forth.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't know what the book was going to be about at that time, but it came up a few years later.
Wow. That's wild. So, you talk about that a little bit, I have to just point out in the acknowledgments, I did see that you shouted out your vicar friend. You also shouted me out in the book, which I was not expecting, which really I think the credit should go to my team. But you credited me, and you even circled it here in the front of the book. I don't know if you can get that, Andy, but I'm very curious, and for our audience here who doesn't necessarily, they're not starting their own businesses and stuff like that, maybe they were thinking about it, but maybe not. You involved using a fountain pen in the process of writing this book. And I'm very curious about that, partly because you're not the first person I've heard, who's an author who's really into fountain pens, that finds the fountain pen as a tool to be one of the best tools for writing a book. So can you please get into the details a little bit about that process?
Yes, I love, love, love this pen. So this is actually my very first fountain pen. And my
Nice.
dad, it's a good first pen.
That's a
right?
solid first pen, yeah.
So my dad has been a super fan of you all for years and talks about what great branding you all do and how much fun. He's always telling me to enter the contests and like raving about these amazing pins. And so I said, well, I want one, but it's got to be real pretty. Like I want a pretty one, you know, like
Yeah.
I want to hold it and feel fancy. Right. So he, I guess, felt that this was the right pen for me. And last spring, very trying to be covert, was like, hey, I'm thinking about getting one of these pens for myself. Which one do you like? And I chose the Seaglass.
So sly, yeah.
So sly. He held on to that thing until my birthday in November.
Wow.
And gave it to me then. So, along with my first 2 inks. And so these were the tools that I used to write the book, because I also used this special journal that they had given me. And I just felt like very connected to, of course, to my parents, and to the fact that this was something special. I was using this like heirloom quality pen to write it with. I was using this fancy, beautiful journal to write it in. And it made me feel official before I was officially an author.
Nice.
And it gave me a ritual, you know, like I got to have my pen, I got to have my journal. This is when I'm working on the book, right? It put me in that frame of mind. And it's just a really beautiful experience to have in the midst of, I started writing this book when my rainbow baby, my daughter Fiora, was 3 months old. So like I needed, you know, to have a way to really focus and be in it when there's so much else going on in my life. And I found that
Is there other things going on when you have a 3-month-old? Like, you know, what better time to get involved in something like this?
Great idea, Christine. Let's write a book. Yeah.
Right. And I empathize with you on that, because that's, you know a little bit about my story, but my wife and I started this business when she was like 7 months pregnant with our first child. And so it's like, yeah, what better time to start something like this? It's basically
Always.
like having another kid, really. So you're
for
like,
sure.
yeah. And, you know, I always talk about how when we had our first kid, like my son slept great, but I was up all night trying to make the business work and get it off the ground, which is what it takes, right?
Yeah.
So one thing about your book that I find really compelling is you talk a lot about mindset and how important that is. Do you really find that mindset is a bigger hurdle, or is it more of like the external things like money management and time management and stuff like that? Tell me a little bit about that.
It's such a great question. I'm really glad you brought that up, because the people I work with are high achievers. And so, you know, doing has never been a problem for them. Like give them a clear plan and they're off to the races, right? Like checking stuff off is like a drug, right?
Right.
Checking stuff off to do it.
Yes.
And so action is their default. And of course it's mine too. And so the missing piece is the belief, is overcoming the self-doubt and overcoming the fear. Instead of just it being about 100% the hustle. Because if you want to create a business that like supports a life that you love, you can't be working 18, 20 hours a day, always and forever. You're going to recreate and maybe even go beyond like the stress that you had in your 9 to 5, right? Because like that's all you know is like how that stressful 9 to 5 feels.
Right.
And so equilibrium, right? When you start your own business, you're going to recreate that unless you consciously learn to think differently. Think like an entrepreneur, you know, do things like delegate and I mean, things you know, set boundaries on your time, whatever it is, but create the feeling of self-belief and of success so that that's what you experience, not the like, oh, it's never enough. There's always more to do, because when you run a business, there's always more to do. And you have to figure out, you have to teach yourself, you have to teach your brain how to enjoy the process, right? Because that's 99% of of owning your own business is the process.
Would you say, because you do consulting, you know, that's part of it's part of how you have the experience to be able to write a book like this, right? Do you find that that's the way that you end up helping people the most, is more on the mindset side, or is it more on like the practical, tactical kind of stuff?
It's really interesting because everyone comes to me thinking they just need a better plan. And that's what I thought too.
Yeah,
You know,
makes
when I
sense.
hired my first mentor, I was like, I just need a better plan. Like this will be fixed. I need to go do, right?
Right.
And so, but for the most part, I would say it's both. Like some people, nobody ever just needs a better plan. Some people need 90% mindset and some people need 50-50. But because I was in digital marketing for 10 years and because, you know, I've started 4 businesses and stuff, I can do both, right? There are people who just consult on mindset, but I find that it's always a mix. I find that like you need clarity on what to do, what's important to do, what you can let go, right? What are your money making tasks? Like, do you need a website to sell or not? Or what's the best platform? Blah, 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 blah. How should I price? Blah, blah, blah. But you also need to develop like the consistency. You need to get over the perfectionism, the procrastination, you know, the fear, like all of that stuff that goes so much along with doing something new, because for most of us being an entrepreneur is something new that we didn't see.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of new stuff involved with starting a business for sure. Do you, you know, I would like to get back to fountain pen stuff. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, and I appreciate you dancing around with me here. The fountain pen thing is just so compelling to me because first off, you're a lefty, which I find is extremely interesting because you just like blow through the myth of like lefties can't use fountain pens, which is something we try to advocate for a lot here at Goulet Pens. But you know, it's just interesting. I'm thinking like you're such a high achiever. Clearly, you probably have quite a bit of technology that is involved in your process of writing or running a business. What is it about a fountain pen? You mentioned the ritual earlier. What is it about a fountain pen specifically that you find is a great part of the process there?
Right. So my dad again was instrumental in this because he wrote a novel and he wrote it by hand. And so this was, you know, several years ago, and he told me there's a different part of the brain that gets accessed when you write something by hand as opposed to typing. And I love to journal in general. Like it helps me figure out what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling to get it out of my head and onto paper.
Yeah.
But I think that, so I journal by hand, right? And
Okay.
so for me, it felt like a way to step away from, oh, I got to write this post for my business, or, you know, I got to write a newsletter, and go, this is about accessing like a really creative part of my brain, about getting in flow, about doing, you know, stepping outside of the to-do list and creating, right? And producing this piece that needs to feel cohesive and not like 5 million Facebook posts just strung together, right? And so for me, when I start writing, especially with the way it feels to work with a fountain pen, to write with a fountain pen, I just found that the words came a lot more easily because I mean, I'm a prolific writer, but there's something about calling it like writing for the book. And I'm like, oh gosh, you know, it instantly has this pressure on it that writing for anything else doesn't, right? Because it's new,
Right.
you know, it's a new level, etc. And so the writing itself wasn't hard. It was oh my gosh, it's a book, right?
Right.
But sitting down with the fountain pen and with the beautiful journal and just creating, once I put pen to paper, I mean, that was easy.
So was it more like a free form, kind of just letting it flow, or was it like mind mapping, bulleting? Like did you just kind of just pick up the pen and just kind of let whatever came out come out?
I did at first, and then we filled in the holes later on.
Okay.
Because it felt to me like I just needed to get out of my head what I thought was important, and then let's go back and put some structure on it. So I tend to be a very structured person, and if I felt that if I got too specific with a mind map or an outline, I was going to overwhelm myself and feel a little bit more restricted in this particular case. And so I wrote what I thought I needed to write, pulled everything together, and then we went back and went, okay, what are the themes? How do we pull this out? Like, that's how it worked.
Gotcha. Interesting. I've my own particular process is kind of like that. I do some mind mapping, I do some bulleting, I do some, but I'm pretty much all over the place, and I use multiple notebooks. It ends up being pretty scattered. Did you find that it was difficult for you to kind of wrangle it together, or I guess is that what your assistant or your editor was kind of helpful for, or did you
Yeah.
did they help with that, or did you like go back and reread your own stuff and then organize it or type it up? I'm just curious how you like went from analog to digital and like where that transition happened.
So both. So I typed it up as my first edit, the first pass.
Okay.
And so that I changed and I moved stuff around and whatever. But actually like a really good editor. I'm like the nerd who would cross off the typos when I was reading books and I would find them. But again, there was something for me about it being my book that I got to a place where I said, I'm too close to it.
Yeah.
Like I literally said to my assistant, I don't know if this is total junk. Like that's my preface. So
Yeah.
like if it is, you can tell me, but I need you to read it and tell me, because she's a great copy editor too. So she read it and she said, this is a lot better than I thought. From the way you preface that, I thought it was going to really stink.
Maybe you have high standards for yourself. I don't know. Just talking to you a little bit here, I get a sense that maybe there's some of that.
Little bit. Yeah. But you know how it is. I'm sure when you get so close to something and you've been working on it for a year, you're like, I'm in the jar and I can't read the label. Like I need somebody to give me some honest, direct feedback and also help me to organize this. That's just where my brain is right now, right? Because I'm not only writing this book, I have a toddler and I have, this business and I have all these other things going on, and there's only so much brain space.
So one thing you talk about in the book is the fact that a lot of times we can make excuses for ourselves about not doing something. It sounds like you had a lot of reasons, probably very legitimate reasons of why you didn't have time to do the book, or, doing 4 different businesses. Like that's amazing. So what do you do for yourself to help break through those kind of mental doubts, I guess? Legitimate, or maybe it's just purely a matter of mindset. What do you tell yourself, or what's your technique for kind of breaking through that?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think like at every new level of business or life, like the same stories pop up. Like we think we're gonna, get over feeling this way or that way, and we learn to at a certain level, and then something new happens, and we achieve something new, and then find ourselves falling back into the same stuff gets brought up, right? Because it's new, and our brains are trying to keep us safe. And to our brains, like safe is same. So personally, I have a mentor who I work with one-on-one, and she totally has my number. Like she is not afraid to call me out on stuff and point out that like, this is what you're doing. Like, this is what it's about for you. Like, this is popping back up. So having that reflection from somebody I really trust, who isn't just going to tell me, no, you need to go do more, right? Because again, like, I'm just going to go do more all day long. The mindset stuff is like where I need the support, right? I need to be held accountable to that, to showing up for that, because it feels like not as much of a business building action, if that makes sense. Even though, like, for most of us, it is the most important thing that we could be doing, in my opinion. But in practice, obviously having her to bounce ideas off of every day, talk regularly, and then journaling every day with my fountain pens, because now I have more. But this is
okay. So you've kind of fallen down the rabbit hole a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have a bunch of inks now, and I'm into it.
Nice. Okay.
But
we'll get back to that. But go ahead.
Yeah. So journaling, saying like affirmations and mantras, and really just noticing what I'm thinking more than anything, right? And is this like something I want to be thinking? And is this helpful, or is this like just not true anymore, but I've been telling myself this for 10 or 15 years, you know, because it's so, so, so true that however we feel about something is the experience or the reality we're going to create for ourselves. Like, you know, you can be sitting on a beach at the Mediterranean, and if you are unhappy, it's that whole idea of like wherever you go, there you are. Like, you're not going to be happy, right?
Right.
So you like working on the internal stuff for me is what allows me to enjoy more of whatever is going on.
That's awesome. One thing that stuck out as I was reading your book, you had something that you called, I guess, questions that inspire curiosity. You know, you gave an example of, the most popular stories you hear is, I don't have anything to offer people, or I don't have anything to offer that people would pay me for, which I think is a very legitimate kind of question. One thing, being an entrepreneur, when I talk to people, they say, oh, I wish I could do that, or I don't know that I have an idea like that, but that sounds really cool. It's always kind of a compelling story. But you say, revise a statement as a question that inspires curiosity. I wonder what I have to offer that people will pay me for. So even just changing that into a question, I thought was such an interesting technique, because it takes a kind of defining, declarative statement of, I don't have anything that people would pay me for, and turning that around to what could they, and it opens up. You can even see just in the question how it shifts that mindset a little bit. And I thought that was a really cool technique that you had, just as like one little blurb, like in the middle of this, really densely packed book. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really kind of into the neuroscience, right, behind this, and like, because some people are like, oh, mindset is so like ethereal and it just doesn't feel tangible, and I don't want to spend time on that. And like, I probably would have said that 5 years ago, so no judgment. But but when we realize that whatever we're telling ourselves, like, our minds believe, right? So if you say I can't have it, then your mind's like, great, got it. Like, we're on board with not having anything to offer. But if you say, I wonder what I have, or how could I, then your mind's like, oh, now we have a better assignment, right? We have something to look for, as opposed to, wah, wah, I can't do it. Let's find all the reasons why I can't do it. Now we have possibility.
I like that. I like that. Do you think that, this is kind of a hypothetical, do you think that everybody has the capability to start their own business? Or do you think that like some people are cut out for it and other people just aren't?
That's a great question. I think if you have the desire for it, then you can do it. Like, I believe that, we have the desires for certain things for a reason. I believe, they're given to us. And so our job is not to find all the reasons why we can't, right? Like we just said, our job is to listen to those desires, because that's how we're made. And I mean, I used to, before I started this business, I used to try to convince all my friends and family members to become entrepreneurs, because I think it's the best thing ever, right? And basically, like, throwing my entrepreneurial pearls before swine, like not calling my family and friends pigs by any means, but like, they didn't want to hear it. They had no desire. They were like, I want to go get a paycheck, and I want to come home, and I want my vacation, and I don't want to have to think about things, right? Yeah. Cool. But now I get to help the people I'm meant to help, right? Who actually want to do this, rather than annoying everyone else with it. And I think, like, to your point about getting the question of like, I don't know if I could have anything to offer and be successful at it. Like, you are such a great example of building a super successful business and team in an extremely niched industry. So I think like that's, I mean, I love that people are asking you that question, because hello, like, if you don't know about fountain pens, you don't know that people still make fountain pens, right? Right. But if you do, you're like really into this. If you're watching this video, you love your fountain pen, and chances you love Brian. So
yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there's some parallels to that, even like within the fountain pen hobby, right? Like, that's something I think everybody watching this video can probably relate to, is if somebody's not willing to learn about fountain pens, or they're not interested, like, it ain't gonna happen. There is no convincing. And I've tried this with several members of my family and people that I know. They will make up every reason, every excuse, and I've heard just about all of them. Oh, it's too much maintenance. Oh, I would lose a pen that expensive, or oh, I wouldn't know what to write, or just all these different things. I think we can, whether it's business, pens, anything in life, we can so easily come up with excuses as to why we can't do it. Do you really think it's just that simple a matter of like, just changing a mindset and then somebody can achieve it? Or do you think that, you know, that there's like certain people that are just kind of like gifted with some ability to do it, and then other people just aren't? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that for a lot of us, myself included, entrepreneurship is a learned skill. I mean, I think that there are some people who are born to do it, and they like never liked school because they were bored, and you know, they started their first business and it became like this huge success or whatever. Just naturally gifted with that. But like, you know, my personality type, since I know you like assessments, it basically in the notes about weaknesses is like, yeah, you should not be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, watch me, right? Because it's something that I want to do. And so I think you got to have a strong drive for it. You got to be open to learning. You got to keep showing up, right? Like, I think those are the things, you know, and it doesn't mean that your first try, I mean, it's going to be the overnight, like 7-figure success, but it does mean that if you keep learning and growing and showing up, then yeah, I think you can have a successful business if it's what you want.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I completely agree with you on that. Like, I do think, you know, it's like anything else. It's like athletic ability or musical ability or public speaking, or whether somebody's got a nurturing talent or empathy. You know, there are certain people that are going to have an innate kind of natural bend towards it. And for those that have natural skill, I'll call it skill, then they can hone those skills and really excel and kind of stand out. But that doesn't mean that those who don't have as much natural skill are just like, okay, guess you're never going to be successful. You know, it's like, I do still feel like you can learn that skill, and especially in this day and age when we have the resources we have, like the fact that you and I can sit here and Skype across the country for free and put this video out for free, and people can watch it from their phone on their way to work or on their lunch break or whatever. That's a pretty amazing time to be alive. So I still think it's compelling and kind of interesting that there are as many excuses as we have for ourselves about why we can't do something, when in fact it's never been easier and more accessible and less cost and a lower barrier to do the things kind of like you're describing that we can build around our passion. So I think it's really important what you're doing, because there's so many people that need to kind of break through that mental kind of barrier, because we have fewer other barriers than we probably ever had. It's really more mental than ever right now. So I just kind of wanted to put a pin in that and just say, you know, it's really cool, especially what you're doing. And I got to call it because you clearly have a passion for helping female entrepreneurs as well, women. And I'm a man, I can't help that. But my wife and I work together in this business, and I know I would not be here without her, and probably more so her than me, if I got to be honest. And I do think it's a little bit different, and the fact that you focus so much on helping women is fantastic. And that's part of why I wanted to have you on here, and just to really recognize that and throw a little love your way, just because I do think that, oh, got a little ding there. I do think it's awesome in what you're doing, and you clearly have a passion for it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny because I actually do work with men as well, and in like my previous, you know, business, I loved working with my male clients. But what I found is that I felt like I was serving a niche that was being underserved, because when I started my first business, I was in my 20s and I was working out of this great co-working space, and I had a mentor there, and I was with a lot of people my own age, but they were all dudes. And I was like, where are my girls? Right? And so, and I'm sure they were places, but like I wasn't aware of them. And so when I started this business, I thought, well, first of all, like, you can totally disagree with me on this. But one thing is that I find that a lot of guys are not really open to the mindset work. And that's such a key part of my process. And so guys who are a great fit for me, but a lot of them just want to take all the action. And then, and don't think that their thoughts are important. And like, you guys might give me some total hate in the comments for this. And that's totally fine. Totally fine. Like, I want more guys to be open to it. I want to know the ones who are, right? And then, but speaking in my personal circles, but yeah, I mean, women, I love like entrepreneurship at all levels. They love funding microloans for like women in developing countries, and you know, all the way to people here in the US, because as we know, women are so the backbone of so much of the economy, and the more women I can help, you know, rise, right? Like the better families are going to be, the better, you know, kids are going to be taken care of, like all of those things. It just has this rising tide and ripple effect that I find so important, because there are so many capable women who just don't know how, just like I didn't know how.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that's awesome. It is interesting, you know, that you've worked with men as well, which I think is really cool. I mean, it's not like your book was like, you know, you talk about your passion for helping women, but you know, I read this and I was like, this is legit. Like I'm making notes and highlighting stuff out of this too, and I'm like, this is awesome. So that's really cool. I just, you know, wanted to shout you out for that, because I think it's very noble, kind of what you're doing and the passions you have, not just for your own consulting and the book and stuff like that, but you clearly have so many other passions. One of which is horses. I know that comes up a bunch in your book. You know, and did you want to talk about that at all? Because that's clearly like a very big passion of yours.
Yeah, and one of my 4 businesses.
Yeah.
So, growing up, I loved them. I didn't have them. I didn't have a dog or a horse, and that's all I wanted.
Right.
I was going to be a vet originally until I found out science was not my thing, and I couldn't dissect anything. So yeah, I found a way to get, you know, my first horse as an adult, because my mom said they're a king sport, like they're too expensive. You know, shows are on Sundays and we go to church on Sundays. Like that just doesn't fit in with our family's life. And so I always found ways to ride a little bit here and there. But it wasn't until I got out of grad school that I got my first horse when I was 23. I still have him. And I added several more, and became a breeder of these amazing horses that are like this really rare bloodline of the Arabian, and are sought after all over the world. And
wow.
It's been a very cool experience to be a part of that community. And also the 3 girls that I have sold, that I have bred and sold, have each gone to women who this is their lifelong dream come true to have this horse.
That's pretty
And so
cool.
I get to pass along that legacy, right? Instead of like, these horses have interest from, you know, all over the Middle East and these foreign countries, but I have gotten to sell each of them to women who have waited their whole lives to own this horse, and in the US. And so they're my friends now too. And it's just a really cool extension of the mission.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's so cool that you're able to help so many people, and it's clear you have a passion for helping people. Even aside, I mean, you're clearly very business savvy, even just in the interactions you've had with me, and like, you're launching your book right now, and I'm like, why are you talking to me? I'm like this obscure fountain pen guy, but like, you would never know that you have anything else going on, because you have been like on your emails, we've been responding, you've been super positive and amicable, like, you clearly have got the goods, which is I respect that. I can recognize that when I see that, because I deal with a lot of business people in my own business stuff, and you're cut above. So
Thank you.
Hopefully this is the first of many books. One thing I'm curious about, just on a personal level, like you talk about in the book about how, you know, the business is not like an end goal. Maybe it is for some. Maybe it's a dream, you know, just like you had of getting a horse. Maybe it was, you know, some people's dream to own their own business. But you talk about how a business is really just kind of a vehicle to achieve some usually larger goal in your life. For you, I'm curious, you know, you've had 4 different businesses. You're writing this book. What is this vehicle, and where is it kind of leading you? What is your goal?
Oh, great question. I mean, the name of my business is Life with Passion, right? Like, it's not just have a super successful business.com, right? So like to be able to, you know, you mentioned helping people definitely is a passion of mine. Like, I have a desire to be, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be famous, but I'm definitely not a sports person, athlete type. You know, I don't have a good
That's what they call themselves as sports people. Yeah, for sure.
Sports people, athlete types. Yeah, my husband would be so proud. He's watching the draft this morning, and I'm like, what? I don't understand what's happening.
I'm in the same boat as you. I'm like, what's the sports? How about those scores? You know, all the sports games.
How about that match?
Let's do that. Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I mean, I have a desire to have like a big presence that inspires millions of people, right? To speak from the stage, which I do a little bit of now, and we'll do more now with the book. But
Nice.
to overall, like, I want to inspire people to make the choice to thrive, right? That like no matter what has happened in their life, that's possible. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And so I want to be very visible for that reason. And then I also want to be able to like be a reverse tither and be at the income level where I can give 90% of my income away and live off of 10,
Wow.
which of course requires a certain level of income to do that.
Yes.
Right.
Or
But I
very
want to
low
be-
expectations for what you
Yeah.
should have, you know.
Right, which is definitely like not the case in my
That doesn't help the horse thing probably very much. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely have like genetic ties to being like having this desire for the finer things. I'll always pick out the most expensive thing in a store, and that was not how I was raised at all. So it's like, okay, that's part of me that I've had to kind of like make my peace with, right? One of my desires, but I want to just be able to write checks for people to pay their medical bills, and I want to be able to just like solve problems that money can solve. Because my husband's aunt lost a son when he was in his 20s, and she now lives by the mantra, like, if it's a problem that money can solve, it's not a real problem. And that's obviously a very controversial statement that I did not agree with until I lost Maeve, and there was nothing I could do about it. You know what I mean? I was like,
I do know what you mean. Very much so.
Right. So of course that's going to be super triggering for people, but like I have come to understand that, but I want to be able, like I said, I want to be able to solve problems that money can solve for people.
Yeah.
And so, including my family and my friends and strangers. And so that's where I'm going with this.
That's pretty cool. That's a very, very noble cause, I must say. So do you feel like, in order to kind of either start a business or have a successful kind of career, if you will, do you need to have like some suit? Because I follow some business people. They're like, I want to buy, I follow Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's like, I want to buy the New York Jets. That's like his thing that he said since he was like 7, and like it's a very clear, tangible, huge, monolithic goal. Me personally, I've never had like a huge end goal like that. Mine's been a little bit more like yours. Like, I want to be a good person. I want to be able to run an honorable business and just kind of achieve some level of greatness, whatever that means. It could just be being a really great husband or father. It could mean running an incredible business. I don't know where that's going to end up. Do you feel like you have to have it like a clear end goal in mind, or can you have a little bit of a windy path? Is that okay?
Totally. I think it can be both, right? Like, yeah, I'm not ever going to buy a sports team, right? But like, I want to buy my husband a Tesla to thank him for being on this crazy ride with me, right? And, because we made a lot more practical car decisions so that I can,
right,
do all these things, run a business, work part-time, like be there for my kid, all of this stuff. And so like, that's a tangible thing. But I also think this path does take so many twists and turns. There's a reason I started 3 other businesses before I got to the one that I feel is like my life's work, right? But I had to, because, we get clarity every time we take action. We don't get clarity from like thinking about it forever and trying to analyze it. We're never going to know all the hows until we start doing it. And so for those of you who are action oriented, like, there's the action for you. You have to start doing it before you know exactly where it's going to wind up. And then I think it's cool where maybe some of your past desires or dreams get fulfilled in ways that you didn't anticipate. You couldn't see in the beginning, but the business was the vehicle, to bring those things about. Yeah, I think we can never predict. I'm sure you would agree. Like, you can never predict what things are going to look like or exactly how long they're going to take, or like, get your claws of control like completely into something when you're running a business.
Oh, most definitely not. And it's interesting because you talk about, in the book, you talk about how you've had anxiety and depression, and you've dealt with like some real hard stuff, clearly. You know, I've talked openly here about the fact that my wife has struggled with anxiety, and we've both had a variety of health issues, and we had our own miscarriage and like had some major kind of setbacks. You know, and I just think that it's really cool that you share that so openly and you talk about that, because I feel like that brings a level of accessibility to doing the kind of work that you're doing, that it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I have to have it all figured out, or I have to be able to, you know, overcome things so cleanly and easily. Like, it's okay to be in the struggle, and it's okay to suffer, you know, openly. And that actually is bravery, and not whatever the opposite of that is, you know. I personally relate to that more than probably most. And I think it's really important just to encourage you on a personal level. Like, the fact that you share that so openly, I think is so needed, because I know that when Rachel and I went through our miscarriage, one of the hardest things about it was feeling like we were alone, or feeling like, you know, we were going through something that other people couldn't relate to, or that we couldn't talk about it, or we didn't know how to feel. So that's one of the coolest things that I think for us came out of that experience, was just like you said, it gave meaning to what you went through. We felt the exact same way, and I think we connect about that. Just because it's like you have no, and I think anybody that's dealt with any type of personal trauma can really relate to that, is just when you go through something so unexplainably challenging, and there's nothing you can do about it. When you talk about it, that gives meaning to the purpose that you went through with that. So I just thought it was really cool, and I'm trying to like lace in as much as possible from what I read. I won't be able to talk about it at all today, just because for the sake of time, but it was extremely compelling read. I kind of went through it. I'm an extremely slow reader, so I had to kind of flip through and just highlight some of the best of what I saw. But it's certainly compelling, and I want to do a deeper dive on this. And for those of you who are watching, we want you to have the opportunity to have a deeper dive too. So Kristine has actually given us some books that we are going to give to you all. So we've got 5 books that we're going to give away. So the way that we're going to work that logistically, if you're watching this, we're going to reward the people that like got right on it and watched it right away. We're going to send you 5 of you copies. So just leave a comment on YouTube, and we're going to pick 5 people from the comments randomly. Leave a comment about what passion do you think that you could build a business around? What could people pay you for? Leave a comment about that, and it can be as real or as fantastic as you want it to be. It would just be curious. Tell us a little bit about yourself there, and we'll pick 5 of you from the comments and just send you a book. And we'll just work out all the details, and Colin will help go through all the comments and do that. But thank you, Kristine, for those and sharing those a little bit. And also, you know, you have it in a Kindle version as well as a paperback version, right? So I guess, yes. Where can people find your book if they're interested in it?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon, The Income Replacement Formula. It's also on my website, lifewithpassion.com.
There you go. Nice. So definitely follow Kristine, check out her site, check out what she's doing. Kristine, I feel like we could talk all day long, but Andy has to go eat lunch here, and we're way over on time, and I don't even care, because you're such a good conversationalist. I just love talking to you, but you and I will surely have to stay in touch, and I would love to you know, follow up with you and see how your book does. Since we're like kind of just on the cusp here, because you released the paperback. We're publishing this on the 11th, so you'll have released the book, what, like 3 days prior, something like that?
Like a week prior, okay, is what we're doing now. Yeah. So nice. Yeah, or 6 days. Yeah. So this is like right off the bat here, which is awesome. So thank you so much for making the time, especially right at the onset of your book launch. I'm sure you're incredibly busy, but I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do you have any kind of final things you want to say as we before we go out here? I would say, number one, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. And I would also say, like, you all already know this if you're watching this, but for building an awesome product-based business, like, follow this dude, you know, like, follow what Goulet Pen Company is doing, because I can say this since I'm like a business expert or whatever. obviously they're the real deal. The core values I'm in love with, and there's a reason that this growth has happened so fast, and so like you could take lessons from that for anything that you wanted to sell.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Very high compliments, especially coming from you. Thank you very much. All right, everybody, that's all we got for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll be back next week with a regularly scheduled Q&A. But in the meantime, it's been fantastic having you on, Kristine. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And everybody, figure out what your passion is and go after it. And in the meantime, right on.